Is Atlas Shrugged worth reading? I don't know. It's really long, and I did the audiobook, so it was really, really, really long. I had not read any Ayn Rand before. I had just, knew basically what her shtick was, right? I will say it's worth reading in two ways. One is just because it's a landmark of thought that people refer to, and if you actually read it, you'll actually know what that is, right? More solidly than people who haven't read it. So that's one reason. Another reason is that parts of it are really correct, and some of it is really timely. Like, there's all sorts of stuff in there about how, people who actually produce stuff are considered evil because they're successful, and people are jealous, and all these things. It goes beyond that, really, but all these things that you see playing out today, right? Now, it's also kind of bananas. Like, it's correct in some ways, and it's deeply incorrect in other ways. And so it can't really be taken seriously as any kind of roadmap to a solution to the kinds of problems that it outlines. So that's a bummer. But, I mean, I'm glad that I read it or had the audiobook read to me in retrospect. Like, I think it was a useful thing to do, or a good use of my time. It did get really slow in the middle, and just be ready to hear a lot of the same speeches coming from different characters over and over and over. And as long as you're prepared for that, it's okay. Like, Atlas Shrugged really goes off the rails when it gets into the whole objectivism thing, which was Ayn Rand's attempt to formulate an ethical system. It doesn't make any sense. Like, seriously, it doesn't make any sense. And so the more that it does that, which it especially does toward the end, it's just like, ugh, right? Someone's saying a lot of Ayn Rand's philosophy is fundamentally a reaction to Soviet Russian culture, and you feel like she overcorrects in her philosophy to be as not Soviet Russia as she could imagine. Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, it feels that way. But I also see her point, right? Like, it's really funny, was Atlas Shrugged written in the 60s or the late 1950s? Let me see. 1950s, late 1957. So, I mean, it was probably written in the mid 50s, right? It's a big book. It probably took a little while to write. There's so much stuff in that book that you're just like, yep, that's exactly what people are saying today and doing today. And it's just, and it would seem like a new thing. You would think like all this stuff is new, but it's totally not. Is Bioshock a suitable replacement for reading Atlas Shrugged? I don't think so. I don't remember. Like, the thing you have to understand is Atlas Shrugged is serious. Bioshock was not very serious as a... Like, Bioshock used this setting of like an Ayn Rand kind of character, but who was a dude. Or, it's essentially like a Midas Mulligan, John Galt kind of character, right? Who made a utopia, and then it all came apart, right? But like, it doesn't... It's very shallow story-wise because it's a video game, right? Like, you don't really get into why it came apart in any serious way, and it doesn't have to justify that. It's just like, oh, like, drugs happened or something, genetic modify, whatever. Like, it's not the same kind of thing as what Atlas Shrugged is, which, again, Atlas Shrugged is a little too cartoony and weird, but the point it is trying to make is quite extensive and detailed and trying to be seriously made, right? And it's just a little too cartoony. Bioshock is not that. But, I mean, Yeah, I agree that Bioshock's premise is a critique of objectivism, but it's not even a critique of objectivism, is what I'm saying. Like it's it uses the setting of objectivism gone wrong. That's not the same as being a critique of objectivism. You know what I'm saying? Now, again, I think objectivism is kind of nutty and ignores basic reality in major ways. So it's not like I don't think a critique of objectivism is a good idea. It's just Bioshock was not that. Yeah, well, that's exactly. So someone just said, I used to think Ayn Rand's villains were unrealistically dumb, and you sort of still do. But being on Twitter has made you think she was more on target than you thought about that. That is exactly what I was thinking when I was reading that book. Like, there is even somewhere in the book, it's just an aside thing, but there's a whole thing about, or just a couple sentences about, like, people getting so irrational that they try to convince you that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. Like, that is literally in the book. Taggart's brother and Hank's wife were literally Saturday morning villains. Yeah, although you don't know that about Hank's wife until the end or the middle. And this is a problem. Like, I was doing the audiobook, right? And the audiobook, you know, the reader was doing all these different characters essentially, which helps because when you're just listening, you at least want to know that one character stopped speaking and another one started. But like, his reading of James Taggart was just, you know, completely uncharitable in every way. Like, there was never anything good about him, which is kind of the way the book is written, but you could make it a little more real in the reading maybe. But it's hard. It's such a big book. So I don't blame him for it. No, there was so much stuff in there that people say in the past few years. It's kind of nutty. It's like exactly the same talking points. Ayn Rand villains all hate the good for being good, and you're like, who's like that? But then you see Elon haters on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, there is, I have seen that happen in the world, the hating the good for being good. It's a thing that people do because they don't want to look bad, right? So if you're showing people up, like, you know, a lot of people don't want to be blamed for their problems and for their for anything that hasn't gone their way, and especially if that complaint, like they said in the book and like is happening lately, if that complaint supposedly gets them merit, like, oh, I'm poor, therefore I'm not one of the evil rich people. It's not my fault that I haven't had a job in 4 years or whatever, right? So that is a part of human nature. Not everybody does that, but some people definitely do. But again, that's one of the things that I think in things like Atlas Shrugged is taken to cartoony excess, you know? When in reality, people's motivations are more of a mixture than that in almost all cases, right? But it's like Twitter kind of has to be abandoned as a place for a reasonable discussion no matter what. Like, nothing makes any sense anymore. Like, nobody's even trying to have a reasonable point. Like, people have forgotten what having a reasonable argument looks like. It's just literally yelling at each other, and it doesn't even matter. Like, even if you yell at somebody with like the most easily disclaimable or disprovable or counterable claim, it doesn't matter because they will have to spend a lot more energy reasonably responding to the thing you said than you had to yell. And so that's just what works on Twitter. It's not good. Hate depends on lack of knowledge of the person you hate. I agree, right? There's also a mechanism in human technology or in human psychology that turns other people into an abstraction, especially other people you don't like. Like, that's how objectification happens. Like, people talk about sexual objectification, and I'm like, I guess that's a thing. But real objectification is when you decide that somebody else isn't a real person with good reasons for doing and believing the things that they do and believe, and who is just like a twirling mustache villain, right? That's objectification. Because you're making them into a target, like that person is evil and must be destroyed, blah, blah, blah. Which happens all the time on Twitter, right?